middle-aged woman had a heart attack and was taken to the hospital. While she's on the operating table, she had a near-death experience, and during this time she saw God and asked God, "Is this it?" And God said, no, you have at least 30 more years to go. Upon her recovery, she decided, well, in that case, I'm going to make some changes, and so she had a facelift and tummy tuck and a few other things, and even had a woman come and change her hair color. She figured since she had another 30 years to go, she might as well make the most of it. Well, she walks out of the hospital after the last of the operations and gets run over by an ambulance and killed. And she arrives in front of God and complains, "I thought you said I had another 30 years. And God said, "Well, with all those changes you made, I didn't recognize you." I've heard it said before that the only thing constant in this world is change. And change is just a part of our nature. It just is. Look at our life, the way it begins. We're born, we go from a nice, safe place where it's usually about 98.6 degrees, relatively quiet, where most of our needs are met without any effort, dark. And then all of a sudden, at least from our perspective, probably not from the mama's perspective, but we're all of a sudden born and everything changes. And talk about change. Noisy, cold, bright, full effect of gravity. And who are all these people passing us around? And what are these occasional flashes of light? And what's an iPhone anyway? And hey, by the way, I'm hungry. Change happens. That bundle of joy does not stay 6 pounds and 9 ounces forever. No, they grow and grow, sometimes even being taller than their fathers. But they grow and they change, and that's just life. I think you get the idea, and I don't think you need me giving you an 80-year tour, especially since I've only been doing this for 62 years. But we all know that as we age, we change. That change is an integral part of our life. But our intimacy with change does not make it any easier to deal with change sometimes. It's like when these two caterpillars were crawling across the grass and a butterfly flew overhead. The one nudged the other and said, you can get me up in one of those things for $1 million. I've also heard that it's not change, it's really the problem. The real problem is transition. Transition is tough. Tomato, tomato, potato, potato, the fork. All have had problems being accepted when they were first introduced. The fork, as we know it today, has not always been a popular utensil. Knives and spoons have been around the table for a long time, but the fork is rather new to the table setting. Its first ancestors appear in Tuscany during the 11th century, but these tiny forks were very rare. In 1611, Thomas Coyet brought several of these oddities to England after running across them in Italy. People were not interested. In fact, they were passionately opposed to the fork. It was not unusual for a preacher to preach a sermon against the fork. And they also used funerals to declare death as God's way of showing displeasure over using such a novelty. It was not until the end of the 18th century that the fork found favor. French nobility began using forks as a statement of refinement, and the use of fingers started getting frowned upon. So if you've got a great idea that people just aren't embracing, pull out a fork, take a piece of cake, and remember as you eat it that change takes time. Change is not easy. Transition's even harder. Our reading from Isaiah today is two intersected psalms of thanksgiving for the expected delivery of the nation of Israel, who was in exile at the time. Israel had gone through a less than desirable transition when their country was taken over by the Babylonians, and Israel's leadership was taken off from their homeland and dispersed into the Babylonian Empire. Isaiah talks about their deliverance in that day that is most definitely coming, because surely God is my salvation, my strength, my song. In that day, with joy, we will draw water from the wells of salvation. The prophet is saying that when, with joy, they draw water from the wells of salvation, a new joy will mark their lives and the lives of those from Israel. That the songs of faith will be heard on their lips, because they will know the gladness of redemption. So in that day, give thanks to the Lord, call upon his name, make known among the nations what he has done, and proclaim that his name is exalted. Sing to the Lord, for he has done glorious things. Let this be known to all the world. Shout aloud and sing for joy, people of Zion, for great is the Holy One of Israel among you. This would be a welcome change for the people of Israel. But still, it took a great deal of time and effort when the change finally came, for them to make the transition, become free people again. Look at Jesus' disciples in our lesson from Luke today. The apostles had been with Jesus not very long, but they had heard some profound teachings. They had seen Jesus heal the centurion's servant, as well as many others who had diseases, sicknesses, evil spirits. They also saw that Jesus raised the widow's son from his coffin and gave him back to his mother. Further, they had heard Jesus report to John the Baptist after having been asked, "Are you the one we are looking for, or is someone else to be expected?" And the messenger was told in Jesus' own words to go back and report to John what you have seen and heard. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cured, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and good news is proclaimed to the poor. And even after all that they'd seen and heard, when their nice little boat ride across the lake changed into a much more treacherous journey, they came to Jesus in fear of their lives, as if the Messiah was going to be taken out by a mere storm. They said, "Master, Master, we're going to drown." Jesus got up and rebuked the wind and the rain and the raging waters, and the storm subsided, and all was calm. And Jesus asked his disciples, "Where is your faith?" The Apostle Paul says, "For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God." The Jews demand miraculous signs, and the Greeks look for wisdom. But we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to the Jews and foolishness to the Gentiles. For those whom God has called, both Jew and Greek, Christ is the power of God and the wisdom of God. It seems that For this life, it takes faith to make it work. No matter what comes our way, faith is required to make the transition. That's what faith is for. A small congregation in the foothills of the Smoky Mountains encountered a major problem when they built their new sanctuary. A church member had willed the growing church some property, so they relocated and constructed a new church. And just 10 days before their dedication service, the building inspector shows up and told them that their parking lot was too small. He informed the pastor that they could not occupy the facility until they doubled their parking. Unfortunately, they had already used up every usable space in their property, and they backed up to a mountain. So the situation seemed hopeless. But rather than lose hope, however, the pastor called a special prayer meeting and asked those with mountain-moving faith to be present. A couple dozen people showed up for this prayer time that went for about 3 hours. And with confidence at the end, the pastor said, "We will open next Sunday as scheduled." The following morning, the pastor was greeted by a contractor who came with an unusual request. He explained his position as a builder of a shopping mall and told of a problem they had of finding fill dirt to complete the job. He asked the church if they would be willing to sell the dirt from the mountain behind them, in the back of their property. And in exchange for their prompt agreement, the contractor would level that surface and pave it, no charge. The mountain movers' prayer had been answered, and their church was packed on the dedication Sunday that next week. For our faith to be mountain-moving faith, we have to truly trust God through the changes and transitions of life, knowing that no matter what comes our way, God will help us weather that storm. It will not always be easy, and life will not always work out the way we envisioned it. But we need to know that God is always journeying with us. Now, I know many of us, being that we live on a peninsula where we're surrounded by three sides with water, and many of the folks, they know a good bit about fishing and fish. But I wonder if they know too much about the koi carp. The koi carp, they are exotic fish that originated in Japan. The Japanese revere these fish, and Americans are collecting them in rapid number lately. There are about 60 or more varieties of the fish, and no two fish are exactly the same. Now, for the amateur collector, if you want to buy a small domestic koi, it costs you about $25, somewhere around there. Or you can buy a pond pack, they call them, which is anywhere from $60 to $600. But if you want to get serious about your koi, you can buy special fish. I saw a Showa koi by a breeder named Issa that was a 29-inch female. It was available for the mere price of $15,999. Now, I actually saw a 30-inch 4-year-old female for $28,000, but I knew I couldn't use that as an example because I had no chance of pronouncing the name of the breeder, so Issa would have to suffice. But you have to really want one of these fish in order to buy one of these fish. But the most unusual aspect of these exotic fish is how they grow. Koi can grow up to 3 feet long in length, or it can remain just a few inches long. Their growth is determined by the size of the pond. If the pond is large, the fish will be large. If the pond is small, the fish will remain small. However, regardless of size, these fish can live up to 75 years. So a 4-year-old koi is not a bad deal, although 28 grand it's kind of a tough pill to swallow. Faith seems to have koi-like properties in that it grows based on the environment in which we keep it. If we surround ourselves with few challenges and small aspirations for spiritual growth, then our faith will remain small. But if we stretch our faith, seek to know God in all of God's fullness, and trust Him through the changes and transitions of life, then we will end up with a larger view of God and an ever-increasing faith. But either way, God is always there for us in every way. God is always willing to meet us where we are. Is always willing to work with us each step of the way. Willing to show us what faith is for at whatever point we are in life. Thanks be to God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.